Okay. Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, and we're coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of western North Carolina. And today's title, The Truth About ETs, Ancient Aliens, Ancient Secrets Revealed, The Perfection Game, How the Universe Works. The whole subject with ETs, it's not like it used to be, really a short while ago when you even talk about extraterrestrials, people roll their eyes and kind of smirk and that. So much has come out now that unless people are just, dug their heels in and have their judgments and not really paying attention to what's coming out from the news and all the different reports and things. I mean, there are so many government officials. And what's the guy's name? You're not going to remember this, I don't think, Scotty. I don't remember. But there's that guy way back when they had the stealth surveillance things during the Cold War, and he was the developer of that was it the U-2
U-2 spy plane.
And,
Yeah.
and then it developed into the different stealth fighters and all. And he was the head guy of the whole that thing. And he gave a lecture to a bunch of, I guess, engineers and that at UCLA. And he was talking about that we have those technologies. And a lot of people like that are acknowledging, the Roswell thing and all that. So, so much has come out now that if you're paying attention at all, the ET thing is just real. You have anything you want to say about that, Scotty?
No, there's, like you said, there's been a lot that's come out. That Jeremy Corbell, I think, is his name, and he's been doing a lot of studies with, and then talking to like Bob Lazar. There's a big documentary on him who used to work at Los Alamos Labs, and then he worked at an area south of Area 51 where supposedly he was working on the propulsion systems.
Yeah, because they had the downed UFOs and that.
Yeah, there's like 7 or 8 crafts, and they span over a long, long time too. Some were found almost as artifacts, like you dig in a super old like Egyptian site or something, something like that, where it's not just that they've been around now, but because there's some controversy, I guess, about some of them have started coming around since we started firing off nuclear weapons,
I think there's truth to that too. I mean, and it's obvious even in the KGB archives and that. I mean, I think it's obvious that the whole thing with nuclear weapons and nuclear explosions and that, when all that was going on, it definitely caught the attention of the UFO people, and they're coming around nuclear sites, and they're just so much that whole thing is self-evident at this point, unless people are just living in complete denial, So what I want to do really in this podcast, because there's a much bigger picture there that I'd like to share with everybody. So let's put this in the context of, current thinking, even from the perspective of those that are open to the idea of, ETs and all that. And to do that, I think we need to look at anthropology, archaeology, and we need to just recognize the fact that even from the perspective of anthropology, every decade or so, they have a new anthropological discovery, find a new skull or a new skeleton somewhere in Africa, or I think in Greece, they recently found one that it just turns the whole field upside down. And so they really don't have a bottom line there. And archaeologically speaking, too, they at one point they thought civilizations went back, 3,000 years, and then they find another discovery, and oh no, it goes back 10,000 years. And last I heard, they found some discovery, and now they think that had to be 100,000 years or 150,000 years. And then, Scotty, you were in the previous podcast, you were talking about how there's this cyclical thing going on, and I forget how long ago you said the thing with the was it an earthquake in Canada that wiped everything out. How many years ago was that, Scotty?
That's about 11,000 years. They say
11,000 years. And there's so many accounts. You see, here's the thing. When you go back and reference historical accounts, if you go back far enough, then because of the limited really understanding, the limited accounts from anthropology, from archaeology, and they are so limited that these accounts cease to be considered accounts and start to be viewed as myths. And that gets compounded by the fact that, if you look at the accounts from the, say, Egyptian point of view, from the Aztec point of view, from the ancient Greek point of view, all these different points of view, they all have at the Hopi point of view, all the different Native American points of view, they all have different, legends, if you will. And so the lack of understanding of the whole thing comes to the conclusion that, well, they can't all be right, and so therefore they're all wrong, and it's just mythology. And that's not really right. It's like, and sometimes I use the analogy in my lectures about it's like a piece of picture jasper, if you know what that is. It's a piece of stone, and lapidaries like to work with that piece of stone. So if you cut through it one way and look at it, polish it and look at it, one way it looks like a desert scene with mountains in the background. Cut through it another way, it looks like, it's an ocean scene, and it's just all these different landscape scenes, and it gives you a whole different scene depending on what kind of slice you put through it. And existence is like that. All these different myths, if you will, are just different slices through the same cosmic, if you will, pie. So in that sense, they're all valid. The ancient Egyptian gods, if you will, they're just another slice through the cosmic pie. The ancient Aztec gods, all these different gods. And that gets even more convoluted, or that may not be the right word, more complex when you start looking at it in the more superficial level, which we would call, not a really transcendental level, but a astral level. But those things, to really get into the mechanics of it and the science of it, how that all works, those are lectures. What's the distinction between the transcendental level, the celestial level, the astral level? But the point here in just a podcast is that there is a mechanic to the whole thing, and there is a rationale to the whole thing. And now when we speak in terms of, the Veda, but we don't want to make a religion out of the Veda. When we use the word Veda, in the deepest sense of the word, we're talking about nature. Veda means nature. It's the nature of existence. And if you view Veda in a certain way, you can turn it into a religion. You can make a religion out of it, in other words, but then it's not really what the Veda is, okay? Just like science, physics. You can make a religion around physics if you want, and people actually do, but it's not physics anymore, you know? So that's how that whole thing is. Uh, one good example I have in my notes here, and I think probably a lot of you are familiar with this, but uh, the archaeologists used to say that the Sphinx was what 3,000 years old, right, Scotty? But then a geologist went there and looked at it, and the erosion of the stone around the Sphinx, he said there wasn't water that would cause that kind of erosion for 10,000 years. So there's no way it could be 3,000 years old. Not possible. And so that right there dated the whole thing to at least 10,000 years. And there's so many things like that coming out now, you know. I'm trying to read my notes here. So back to the whole ancient aliens thing. You know, I've heard it said, and I don't know how many people actually think this way, but I've heard it said that with respect to religion, some people feel like, well, if it turns out that there are aliens, ETs, that would blow Christianity out of the water. And that is so not true. If we talk about Christ, and I'm not talking about, Jesus, the flesh, incarnation of the Christ. I'm talking about Christ as we would say, Chaitanya, Christ, as we would say, the unified field, the underlying basis of all existence, the Christ, of which Jesus was an incarnation of that. Okay. Then, if there are ETs and all that does is it would expand our appreciation of the grandeur of the nature of the Christ, just how vast the Christ is, how incredible, the universe and how vast it is. It's a huge community of all sorts of different species, all sorts of different beings, of which humans are one. It's much, much more than just an unpopulated. It's densely populated. It's much, much more than an unpopulated bunch of galaxies and planets with just one populated planet called Earth. I mean, it's just too ridiculous, It's important to understand how all of this knowledge came about, and once we grasp that understanding of the knowledge of Veda and where it came from, and not just, oh, okay, I get that, I heard that, okay, great, I get it, but to really work with it and study it to the point where it's not just some, okay, intellectual concept, but it's something that really makes sense to you because you've worked with it and studied it enough and studied the things that are in the Veda enough that it's like, oh my gosh, this is real. This is for real. This is valid. This cannot be anything other than valid. And that's a step-by-step process, current approach to knowledge is great. I mean, we build cell phones and we build cameras and we build airplanes and the technology is huge. And I mean, it's phenomenal, this stuff we've accomplished, really. But different cultures have done incredible things. The ancient Greeks, for example, they had all the mathematics we have today. They didn't have the number system that we did. So it was a little more awkward and bulky. but the understanding conceptually was there. They knew the earth was round. And isn't it amazing that 1,000 years later, in the Dark Ages, we thought the world was flat? So it's not like there's a continuum of gaining of knowledge from generation to generation. It cycles. And the ancient Egyptians had knowledge that we don't have now. And it's amazing once you get into the Veda, the knowledge that's there. There's a part of the Veda that explains how to build a UFO. They're Gravananas, they're called. In one part of it, I remember, and I learned this, back in the 80s, there's one part of the Veda explains how to build a UFO, but it calls for a particular element. And back in the 80s, we didn't know what that element was. But it's interesting, Scotty, you mentioned Bob Lazar, and he was talking about element 115 as an essential element. And it's only come out recently that they've come up with an element 115 that, in the particle accelerators and all that. And evidently they're thinking, and not all physicists, this is just cutting edge stuff, but that it is in fact probably what it is. And there's so many technologies in Vedic knowledge that there are temples in India where they chiseled out, how many hundreds, if not thousands of tons of granite to make out of one big, huge mass of granite, one giant Shiva temple. And they cannot find where the remains of that chiseled out granite is. It just like it dissolved into space. It's a technology we know nothing about. All sorts of things like that. And it's all in the Vedic literature. But you see, you can't look up how to dissolve granite on page 387 of the Veda. It's not written that way. It's written in a language that is so all-encompassing and so vast and so profound, even in the very way it's written. The meaning of the words have such depth to them, The corporation that we have, that the temple is under, and it's called the Sierra Synod of Rational Spirituality, and also known as Ancient Technology Research Institute. And there are Vedic scholars in India that we work with, as well as the pundits we have here in the United States, and Pandit Prasad, who runs the temple here at Mount Summit, a tremendous Vedic scholar. These guys have such phenomenal knowledge of the ancient Vedic scriptures. So in a way, it's inappropriate to call it ancient technology because these guys have a lot of that knowledge at their fingertips. But the point is, it's not, some of it's being employed. They do some of the technology every day, but so much of it is not being employed. And that's what we're about here, is manifesting that and bringing that forth. But there's a word in Vedic literature for intuition. My pronunciation of Sanskrit is so terrible, I shouldn't even attempt it. Antar Chaitanya or something like that. Chaitanya. Anyway, it's in the notes and you can look it up, and please forgive, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it right. I'm still trying to say dal properly. Anyway, it means intuition, and translated, it's kind of like the finest feeling level, or the gut feeling. And the idea is that intuition comes from a very deep place within, and it involves then the integration of that finest feeling level with the mind. So we can talk about it as almost like we have two brains. We have, the gut, and we have the thinking brain, what we think of as the mind. And when those two are fully integrated and the gut feeling is so totally refined, then we have intuition. And when that gets refined to the ultimate level, it gets to a point where it's even called cognition. And what cognition is that transcendental level, that finest level of existence. In fact, where we go all the way down and tap into what's called the Shruti level, the transcendental level, the absolute, that which lies beyond relativity, that feel of pure oneness. But within that transcendental level, there's a self-interacting dynamic of oneness. And that is within that then is what's called the Veda. It's from the perspective of relativity, is virtual. It's not of the relative, you see. And so cognition then is when those subtle impulses that are the underlying basis of existence well up through the physiology, through that finest feeling level, if you will, and through the whole physiology and manifests as what's called Vedic cognition. And the whole study of that is vast. But that whole thing is called Shruti. And contained within that, the Vedic cognitions is the knowledge of everything. Why? Because it's the source of everything. It's the seed form of all knowledge. I hope that, kind of conveys to some extent, what we're talking about here. Now, a little bit more on this, and we're leading to a point here where it's going to give you the big picture with respect to what human beings are, what the ETs are, the big picture of the universe, the whole thing. So that's the deepest level, the Shruti level, and then that we talked about cognition. Then the next level, if you will, is called Smriti. It's called memory. It's the remembering with that Shruti level, and that's the level of Smriti. It's the memory of the Shruti value, and it's that the degree of which we have that Smriti value lively, that is the degree to which we have health, the degree to which we are in tune with the very fabric of creation that supports and sustains us. It's the source of intelligence. It's the source of harmony. It's a source of integration. It's a source of balance. It's the source of life, source of existence, you see. Now, everything cycles. Everything cycles. The sun rises and the sun sets. There's a period of light and a period of darkness, okay? And there are short cycles, 24-hour cycle of the day, the monthly cycle of the moon, like that. Everything cycles, even, the cycle of the electron pulsating through, like that. Now, major cycle is called the Yuga. And a Yuga is a very long period of time. There's Sat Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapar Yuga, and Kali Yuga. We're in Kali Yuga right now. Kali Yuga is an age of darkness, okay? And Kali Yuga lasts a little less than half a million years. Dwapar Yuga, twice as long as Kali, and then the Treta twice as long as Dwapar, and then Sat Yuga is twice as long as Treta. So Sat Yuga, now Sat Yuga is a time when it's like full sunshine of enlightenment on Earth. So that's a time when people are living in complete harmony with the Shruti value, the pure Veda, total harmony with natural law. Everybody is living in accord with their dharma, their life's work, their purpose with nature. Everybody's living in harmony with nature, okay? And in each of the progressive following yugas, people are living less and less in harmony with nature. Okay, in the blog that goes along with this podcast, I list them the rishi value, the deva value, that is kind of like the organizing power, or the how would we say it? The sort of like the rishi that's in charge of that particular yuga. Now, it's an interesting thing because that there's a term called samhita. Samhita means wholeness. So it's like, even though in Kali Yuga, for example, we're not living the totality of the pure value of the Shruti value, the pure Vedic value, the pure value of Shruti. Nevertheless, it is a wholeness value. It's kind of like it's looking at that totality value, but through a lens. And so everything is seen through the lens and held through the lens. It's a wholeness of the thing, but it's coming through that particular lens. Is that making sense, Scotty?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And so and that lens, you could say, is the rishi that corresponds with that particular yuga, that particular long period of time. And so each cycle, is roughly, what is that? You got 500,000 years, then 1,000,000 years, then 2,000,000 years, then Sat Yuga would be 4,000,000 years. Add all that up, where you're looking at something like 7,000,000 years. Okay. A Mahayuga is 28 of those. And so you end up with something like, what does that come out to? Something like a little over 200 million years. And that's a complete cycle of how long human beings exist. It's all Vedic. It's all cognized. 200 million years we've been around, Scotty.
Now, doesn't that also coincide with the actual, like,
I can't hear you. What?
Doesn't that coincide with the physical movement of, like, our solar system through the galaxy also, kind of like
There are all kinds of cycles like that. Absolutely. But the point is, human beings have been around for a long time, and they have been all over the universe and are to this day. And the thing is, think about this. If human beings have been very advanced and they have these UFOs, these Vamana, these flying machines and stuff, and they've attained levels as in literature, not just Vedic literature, but other literature, where they live for a long, long, long time. When the planet, and haven't we talked about this in previous podcasts, about the fishbowl, and the fishbowl gets polluted as it is now, right? And what do they do during that time? Well, they do pretty much one or two or three things. One, they just go into a cave, and they just don't have anything to do with the world. Like that one saint said to another saint, when the saint was thinking about coming out and enlightening the world, helping purify global consciousness. What did he say to him? Why do you want to go out in all that mud? So they go into caves. Another thing they might do is find a pure valley hidden away in the Himalayas, for example, Shangri-La, that idea. Another thing they do is they get the heck off the planet and they go to somewhere, even in the midst of Kali Yuga, which is the whole universe. It's always Sat Yuga somewhere, period of Sat Yuga in the midst of Kali. And so they split, they take off. And so the whole universe, when we talk about ETs, a lot of those ETs are human beings that are just flying through, passing by. And, we landed on the moon. I think that's great. I really do. But at the same time, this stuff has been going on for millions of years.
Gives a
And
whole
right
new
now, the planet is just polluted. It's a normal cycle. The sun rises, the sun sets. That's all there is to it. I think one thing that helps is this, what did Einstein say? Either everything's a miracle or nothing's a miracle. But we live in small little worlds, don't we? And if anything, things that aren't part of our small little world, we consider miracles. But I think if you've had the opportunity to really witness things that from the perspective of the little world that you've been accustomed to are actually miracles, it changes your life. You start to see things differently. You start to appreciate things differently. It expands your horizons. And you become open to deeper levels of understanding. You cease to live a life of indoctrination and start to live a life of really expanded awareness, What else, Scotty? I'm doing all the talking here.
Well, I was saying this gives a whole new meaning to born again, you know, like when, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Everything exists on different levels. On one level, being born again is getting inspired at some sermon or whatever and jumping up and throwing your hands in the air and yelling hallelujah. And that's good. I mean, you can be inspired, oh, I'm born again. And that's great, But there are other levels. What was the level you were referring to? I got it, and then I forgot what you were pointing at there, Scotty.
Well, no, it's just like these civilizations are born again. You know, they
Yeah.
they rise, they fall. It's just like the United States when in 1776 when we started this whole thing, it was born and it rose, and now everybody's freaking out, and it's kind of you got they cycle, and so
Everything cycles.
yeah.
That's right. That's right. And the other thing is cycles, cultures rise and then they fall. And the reason they fall is because the reason they rise is because there was a great surge in knowledge, a great surge in living in harmony with nature. If they weren't growing in their harmony with nature, they wouldn't rise in the first place. One individual, it's just statistics. One individual cannot be living in harmony with nature, but get away with it and rise. You can make a lot of money selling drugs, for example, and that's not in harmony with nature, but you get away with it. But a whole culture to rise can't be addicted to drugs because it's just not in harmony with nature. It's just statistics. Statistics is like if you have a dump truck full of sand and you dump the sand out the back of the dump truck, 1 or 2 grains of sand may end up in front of the truck, but guaranteed every time you're going to end up with a big pile of sand in the back of the truck after you dump it out. That's just statistics. So similarly, if you have a culture and it's all the bulk of the wave of it is in harmony with nature, you're going to have a culture that rises in harmony with nature and surges and does well. But if it starts living out of balance with nature, and it can do that over time, just law of increasing entropy, if nothing else, then the society reaches its demise. And how does history look at that culture? Well, even at the end of that culture, the knowledge has been lost. It ceases to be in harmony with nature. So even at the tail end of that culture, people are looking at the culture and saying the culture's messed up. And so 1,000 years from now, if they even lost the knowledge at the tail end of that culture, how do you think we're going to look back at that culture 1,000 years later? They're going to see the tail end of it. And if they couldn't even dig out the purity right at the end of it, how in the heck are they going to dig out the purity of it 1,000 years later? It's not easy to do. And the only way it can be done is from within the individuals. They have to find it within themselves. You see? And that is just the nature of it's the cyclical nature of life. The sun rises and sets. It's just the way it works. There are 28 Mahayugas. And after that time, the human beings won't be around anymore. But then the cycles all return. Everything comes and goes. Everything comes and goes. Everything has its time. So our predictions and our experts, I mean, if one good thing came out of the COVID, it's we realize our experts don't know what they're talking about. You know, Leonard Nimoy, what was it, Commander Spock in Star Trek? Leonard Nimoy, back in the 70s, was on television doing some sort of a news spot or whatever. And he was saying that in the next 10 or 20 years, scientists are telling us that there's going to be an Arctic freeze. And, New York City and everywhere, it's just going to be under a sheet of ice. And now they're saying it's going to be global warming. They have no idea. They have no idea what they're talking about. There's so much going on in the news. I'm just tired of talking about it. And just all you need to do with the banking crisis and, on and on. Just know that everything's screwed up right now. It's going to be screwed up for the next couple of years, but there are little glimmers of sunshine here and there. People are waking up. It's all going to work out. The cycle is intact and everything's going to be fine. And we've got a golden age right around the corner. So just hang in there. The sun sets, but then it rises again, I hope this all makes sense to you. I hope it all makes sense to you. I know it's probably a lot to hear, and there's so much more. There's so much more we could say. But I think one step at a time. And I guess that's probably it for today, Scotty. Did I leave anything out? Did you look over my notes here?
No, I think you got it. Yeah.
I think we're good. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. And I guess that's it for this week. And we'll talk to you again next week on Ancient Secrets Revealed. Take care. Thanks for listening.